that there's a lot of nostalgia, particularly in Great Britain, in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain. I can't really speak about, potentially somewhat in Germany, but certainly the Western European powers that have a history of imperialism and global power and influence are definitely nostalgic for the world that has long since passed. In the United States, there is no such nostalgia. And I would argue that in much of Europe, that nostalgia is giving way to reason and rationality. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're walking around the streets of Paris right now or London, you're seeing something that is far more damaging and far more dangerous to your country than anything that Russia could conceivably ever mount. And what am I talking about? Well, you're seeing your country fall into the hands of recent migrants who are unalterably opposed to your way of life, to your culture, to your religion. They, in turn, are attempting to set up some facsimile of the country from which they came, the society from which they emerged. This is immediate and it's dangerous. Now, the elites, and when I mean elites, I'm talking about the people largely with money, with the ability to insulate themselves from what happens inside their societies. We have them, you have them. They're not terribly concerned, and they view or they criticize their own populations for their lack of tolerance. Well, they're not being knifed in broad daylight. They're not being assaulted, brutalized, or raped. They're not dealing with this sort of in-your-face cultural assault that people in Great Britain and France and Germany are seeing every day. So I think the population doesn't have much tolerance left. The other thing is that I have never seen, and perhaps you have, I don't know, but in my times in Europe, I have seen no appetite for a knockdown, drag-out war with anybody, least of all Russia. And if you mention to most of the people I know in Germany or Austria, certainly in Central East Europe, let's all march east and go into Ukraine to save Ukraine from the Russians, they look at you as though you've lost your mind. They're happy to send untold quantities of money and cash and equipment as long as it doesn't hurt them economically, obviously, and that's about to bite very hard right now. They don't care. They're not interested in that at all. So I think what we have to do is something that I think President Putin has done. President Putin has exercised a great deal of patience. He's being very patient, waiting for this tide of change to sweep over Europe. It's coming. And President Trump's message to the Europeans is going to accelerate that process. The real question is how soon do Americans wake up and recognize that Washington has led them down a blind alley?
You just heard Colonel Douglas Macgregor, decorated combat veteran, former defense official, and one of the few voices inside the American military establishment willing to speak truth, deliver a shocking but undeniable reality. The real danger facing Europe isn't Russia. It's happening on its own streets. And he didn't stop there. He said the imperial nostalgia of Britain, France, and other Western powers is fading. In its place, a growing awakening, fueled by cultural displacement, elite betrayal, and war fatigue. Let's unpack what Macgregor said, and why this moment may mark the beginning of the end of Western unity against Russia. Macgregor starts with a sharp observation. There's deep nostalgia in countries like Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain, nations that once ruled empires and shaped the world. They miss the days when their flags flew over distant lands, when their culture was dominant, when their power was unquestioned. But that world is gone, and clinging to it only blinds them to the real crisis unfolding today. Because while these nations lecture others about democracy and values, they're losing control of their own cities, schools, and public spaces. Not to an invading army, but to uncontrolled migration, failed integration, and a ruling class that doesn't care. As Macgregor puts it, you're seeing your country fall into the hands of recent migrants who are unalterably opposed to your way of life. That's not racism. That's reality. And it's playing out in suburbs turn no-go zones, rising crime rates, attacks on women, religious tensions, and a sense that native populations are being erased. And yet, the elites remain detached. They live in gated communities. They send their kids to private schools. They fly to Davos and preach tolerance. while ordinary citizens face the consequences. And when people push back, they're called bigots, racists, extremists. But as Macgregor says, they're not being knifed in broad daylight. They're not being assaulted or raped. The people are, and they've had enough. Here's the deeper truth Macgregor exposes. The ruling class doesn't fear Russia. They fear their own population. Because if the people wake up, really wake up, they'll demand borders, security, cultural preservation, an end to endless war. And that threatens the entire globalist project. So instead of addressing the real issues, the elites blame Russia for everything, push war drums, send billions in aid to Ukraine, while ignoring the collapse at home. But the people see through it. They know. Their taxes fund foreign wars. Their industries are deindustrialized. Their energy costs are weaponized. And their children are told to feel guilty for existing. Also, a small class can maintain power. And now that power is slipping. Macgregor drops a key truth. I have never seen any appetite in Europe for a knockdown, drag-out war with anyone, least of all Russia. And he's right. Ask the average German, Austrian, or French citizen. Should we march east and fight Russia? They'll look at you like you're insane. They'll say, why should our sons die for Kiev? Why are we freezing in the dark for a war we don't believe in? And they're not interested, as long as it doesn't hurt them economically. But now, it is hurting them. Energy prices are soaring. Inflation is crushing families. Factories are closing. And still, the leaders keep sending weapons, money, and political support to Ukraine. Because they serve Washington, not their own people. But that loyalty won't last. Because when the economic pain hits hard enough, the backlash will be unstoppable. Then Macgregor reveals something profound. President Putin has exercised a great deal of patience. And that's the key. Putin isn't rushing. He isn't overextending. He's waiting. Because he knows. Europe is fracturing. Public trust is collapsing. Nationalist movements are rising. And the sanctions regime is unsustainable. So he waits. And watches. And lets the West destroy itself from within. Because you don't need to defeat an enemy in battle when they're tearing themselves apart. And Macgregor believes Trump's message to pull back from endless war will accelerate this process. Not because Trump is a savior, but because his rhetoric gives voice to what millions already feel. We've been lied to. We've been led down a blind alley. It's time to put our country first. Macgregor ends with a sobering question. How soon do Americans wake up and recognize that Washington has led them down a blind alley? Because the U.S. isn't immune. It faces the same forces. Cultural displacement, elite detachment, economic decline, endless wars. But unlike Europe, the U.S. doesn't carry the burden of imperial nostalgia. So it has a chance if it chooses national interest over ideology. But right now, it's following Europe into the same trap, spending trillions, provoking nuclear powers, alienating allies. While its cities burn, its borders collapse, and its people suffer. And for what? A failing empire? A dying alliance? A war that can't be won? In conclusion, Colonel Douglas Macgregor gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real forces shaping the future of the West. Not tanks, not missiles, not NATO summits, but culture, identity, and survival. Russia isn't winning because of its military alone. It's winning because the West is losing legitimacy at home. And when a nation forgets its people, it loses its purpose. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
Ukraine lacks the ability to provide concerted air defense over strategic targets, important targets, and Russia is able to just pick them off at will. And you combine these two factors, and it's just it spells doom for Ukraine. What's going to happen? Nothing. I mean, I what is Europe going to do? The Europeans just acknowledge they can't put troops into Ukraine. They don't have any troops to put into Ukraine. And if they did have troops to put into Ukraine, they can't support them logistically. It's just a pipe dream. Europe can't do anything without America backing them up, and America's not going to back them up. Not on this. So I think what you're going to see a lot of gnashing of the teeth, a lot of pulling of the hair, a lot of bold statements made by, politicians who, better take a look in their rearview mirror because their political base is crumbling in each one of their respective countries. I don't see Macron, Starmer, or Merz lasting much longer. You know, the German economy is in free fall. Great Britain's on the verge of open revolt, and France isn't much better. And these are the people that are supposed to rally and somehow build a viable European army. We know they don't have a European army. That's why um, I think von der Leyen said in a recent speech that the Ukrainian army is the first genuine European army. Really? Because we trained them, we equipped them, and now we have to know how to use them properly. Gosh, I mean, how would you feel to be a Ukrainian knowing that you're dying for some European dream and it's not about Ukrainian sovereignty, it's not about Ukrainian independence or, Ukrainian democracy or anything about Ukraine at all. You're simply a tool built by the Europeans that the Europeans will use and abuse to suit the interests of Europe, not Ukraine. This is the reality. Europe can do nothing. There is nothing Europe can do anything with. Russia's victory is inevitable, and it's going to occur on terms that will be acceptable to Russia.